Hello and welcome back to another video. I'm joined today once again by Mr. Rob Dawson from ESPN. How are you today?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good, good. Yeah. Had you on a few times, and last summer we met in person for the first time in Las Vegas, which was an interesting time. And so it's good to have you back and to do this again after what's been a chaotic kind of year, hasn't it?
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, but yeah, definitely chaotic.
Yeah, it seems like it always is, but I think that's just because that's United, isn't it? Hasn't been very settled for a long, long time. So yeah, well, let's get into all of the topics because there's a lot of things to discuss on this. First, I think I wanted to ask you some questions about one of the main, obviously, ongoing topics that I think you had a report on even just this morning. I think the last time we did a video, we had just hired Eric Ten Hag, and I think you guys had kind of broken the story of him being selected as the manager under totally different people, and we had a bit of a chaotic end to the season, an extended review, and now essentially after an up and down few seasons, Ten Hag is set to stay, but there's still a lot to be sorted, isn't there?
Yeah, obviously he's going to stay now for the short term. I wouldn't like to put a time frame on how long he's going to stay
Yeah.
because the circumstances around him staying haven't been the biggest vote of confidence, and that's not me making any kind of judgment on Ten Hag as a manager. That's simply stating the facts of how United have kind of operated in the last couple of months. They are talking now about a new contract, which they kind of had to do because he's got a year left. And the minute that a manager or any kind of player gets into last year of contract, you immediately you have to start talking about when you're going to extend. Are you going to extend? So to kind of put that to bed, United have kind of revealed to us that they're talking about a new contract. I think that it has become or is becoming quite complicated because of the difficulties now with this kind of marriage of convenience. That it's you said it yourself there in the intro that this Eric Ten Hag is not INEOS's manager. He's a manager hired by completely different people. And if history of football clubs tells us anything, that new owners tend to eventually want their own man. Right now, it's going to be Ten Hag. How long that lasts is ultimately down to him. And if he wins loads of games, he's not going anywhere. But
Yep.
I wouldn't be putting my house on Eric Ten Hag being Man United's long-term manager.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it's obviously been a bit of it was an unknown, even sort of a saga during the season because new people in place, everybody right from top down gone kind of one by one at United as INEOS came in, which is any takeover of any business. That's just what happens. They go top down and start replacing people. I think there's like one executive left in Colette Roche who's working on a stadium with them, and otherwise it's brand new from all the way through the sporting director, all of that, and of course all the people who chose Ten Hag, who hired Ten Hag, who made the agreements over his contract, his current contract, the powers within it, things like that. No, none of them are there, and we know that INEOS's idea of a football club is probably a bit different to the very manager-centric concept that United have been operating off of for such a long time, obviously, which was fine when you had Sir Alex, but ultimately since then has not worked out to the way that you want it to be. And in the end, I think all of football is kind of moving away from the manager-centric model, isn't it? I mean, Liverpool Klopp leaving have changed quite a bit now, haven't they? And given Arne Slot the head coach job specifically.
Yeah, I mean, and in fairness to Man United, they have kind of recognised that, and Sir Alex Ferguson and his time at Man United was so unique, I suppose, that it gave or presented United with a unique set of problems in that football clubs in the mid-80s were not the football clubs that we know now. And a manager in the mid-80s did do everything. He did everything from scouting to sign players. He spoke to the parents of young players. He could do everything. the problem, well, I say problem, obviously not a problem because Sir Alex Ferguson was so successful, but an associated problem was that he became so successful, he stayed for so long that Man United grew as a football club around him almost, and that these old powers that he had just remained with him, and he was very, very good at delegating some of the stuff that he didn't really want to do anymore, like the day-to-day first team coaching. Obviously, he started doing that, but by the end of his time there, he wasn't really doing that. But he kept a lot of the other powers. He kept a lot of that kind of focus on himself. When you remove someone like that out of a football club, it creates this huge power vacuum, and United have struggled with that. And in fairness, they recognised that a long time ago, particularly after Louis van Gaal. After Louis van Gaal left, they sat down and realised that they'd given Louis far too much control over transfers, that they were spending far too much money on players who the manager wanted, and realised that wasn't the way to go. The problem, though, since then, is that after Louis, they hired Jose Mourinho, who is a huge character, a huge personality, who also wants his say. He'd had that kind of involvement at previous clubs and wanted it at Man United. And it's stuck with Man United managers, and particularly this veto that they have, this veto on players coming in and leaving. And it was a big thing for Ten Hag when he came in. There's an interview that he gave before he actually even took over at United in the Dutch press, where he basically said that was one of his kind of lines in the sand, that he needed that kind of, not control, but that involvement on transfers. The problem is that they gave him that, and his track record at Man United has just not been great. And so when you're INEOS and you come in and you see all these other clubs like Liverpool, doing it in a different way, you put that together with Ten Hag's record in the market and go, well, that's not great either. You decide, probably quite rightly, that you want to do it in a different way. You hire all these different recruitment guys like Dan Ashworth or Jason Wilcox, people like that, whose job it is specifically to recruit. And they say, well, these guys are going to recruit. Our manager's role is going to be coaching the players on the pitch and preparing the team for a Saturday.
Right.
But there is going to be an issue though now, because Ten Hag is not a character who wants to give up control and wants to give up power. So if you're taking something off him, he's going to want something in return. I honestly don't know how that's going to work out right now. And I'm not suggesting that it's not going to happen, but it wouldn't be a massive surprise if there was no new contract. They're sitting down and they're talking about it, but it's so complicated that it wouldn't surprise me if this wasn't done. United want this to be done before the tour starts, obviously, because the minute that the tour starts, journalists come into press conferences and the first question is, are you going to sign your contract? What's happening with your contract? What's happening with this? And they don't want that, and I can understand that. But he's got a year left on his contract. He obviously doesn't need to sign a contract to start the season as manager. But this is a really, really complicated negotiation now. Hopefully, for United's sake and for Ten Hag's sake, it doesn't get messy and it gets solved very, very quickly. Because if it doesn't, it will become an issue, and it's the minute that the season starts, pre-season starts. I mean, you'll know, you were there in Las Vegas with press conferences, that you don't want these issues hanging over you before a new season. So hopefully for United and for Ten Hag, they can get it sorted and ironed out pretty quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And we've seen in the past, of course, how bad things can go pretty quickly, even with confidence in United. I mean, the third season, of course, both Jose and Ollie got new contracts right beforehand, and things went bad really fast at the start of the new year. The summer, I remember Jose Mourinho that summer. There was a big European tournament as well. Well, not European, but the World Cup was that summer, and the transfers were slow, and there was kind of almost open conflict between him and Ed Woodward at the time going into that season, and it went bad really, really fast. And obviously that's the type of thing you don't want to see happen with United. But I think that it's interesting because there's obviously different information, different ways that people can view it. But Ten Hag was really close to not being in this job. There's no doubt about that. He was really close to being sacked, and however it's gone or however it's been put out, it wasn't exactly like, I don't know if it was exactly like they reviewed everything and for sure he's the best guy and they're totally happy with all of that. as it might have been presented. Certainly, there's debate over whether they were turned down by other managers, but we kind of know you don't get into the depths of those discussions if you're not seriously considering a change. And the biggest thing are these points that do have to be resolved because they're built into the contract, right? There's the transfer and recruitment control, whereby, of course, they would rather want a system where, of course, the manager's consulted, as is everybody else who's involved in it, from the heads of each recruitment department and the technical directors and all that, but not having that final voice, which a veto kind of gives you. I think people can underrate the amount of power that gives somebody. And then, as well, you have these discussions about things like the style of play, how we want to see United progress moving forward. And then, of course, the other thing that's coming up sort of right now is this assistant manager or an assistant coach of some kind coming in, if it's somebody that the club want to appoint, to say that gives them a little bit more of a foot in the door into the football team itself, onto the training ground, somebody that maybe bridges some of the gaps between Ten Hag and players and Ten Hag and management and all of that. And I know that there was likely some conflict when this was brought up earlier in the year as an idea. What do you think? What do you think of it now? This obviously Van Nistelrooy being the name that, given that he's Dutch but also has ex-United player, has English experience, all of that maybe is a common ground between them. What do you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, all of these things are really complicated. I mean, the coaching staff, I think recruitment is a massive one because, the situations that you described there, particularly one with Jose, the reason that went south really quickly is because of recruitment. Recruitment is the single biggest issue at a football club, and that goes for any club, not just Man United. And it's caused a lot of problems for Man United managers in the past, and it has done already for Ten Hag. The coaching staff issue is a different one, but also, again, you're kind of asking Ten Hag to relinquish some control. And from my dealings with him since he took over, the one thing that Eric has wanted throughout everything that he does is control, and to the point of the clothes that staff wear and the length of the grass on a training pitch, that kind of stuff, that kind of level of control. So he's not, in my experience of him, is not going to take kindly to people telling him do this, do that. Now, obviously, he's manager of Man United, and I'm sure he wants to stay as manager of Man United, so there has to be a certain degree of compromise.
Right.
The coaching staff is an interesting one because you've got a situation already with Benny McCarthy, who around sort of April time was told that, or not even told, just it got to April and no one has spoken to him about a new contract. That obviously was very disappointing for Benny, and also disappointing for Eric, who had brought him in. Eric is very, very loyal to his existing staff, and until and wants Benny McCarthy to get a new contract. Because we're at this point now, and what we're in the end of June, and no one's spoken to him or he hasn't got a contract, you have to assume that he's not going to get one now,
right?
Which is going to leave a place open on the staff. Whether that's going to be someone that Ten Hag says, I want this guy, or whether it's going to be someone like you described, someone who INEOS not have picked but approve of, who can maybe help with this kind of this game model that they want to run all the way through the club, from the academy all the way through to the first team, in a way that City have, basically. The problem with that is that, in my experience, managers do not take kindly with having coaches thrust upon them, and because it has to be a relationship thing, right? You have to, that is your inner circle. These are the guys that you speak to about the problems that you face every day, and if you don't trust those people in your inner circle, that it becomes a massive problem. I mean, again, it's something that's really, really tough to navigate. And you've also got a side issue now with Darren Fletcher, in that, great Man United servant, was appointed technical director when he probably shouldn't have been, because he wasn't really qualified for the role. His role by the end of last season wasn't really technical director at all. Anyway, it kind of morphed into this kind of hybrid coach role where he was on the training pitch all the time. Then they hired Jason Wilcox as a technical director. United say they're going to keep Darren Fletcher, but in this kind of mystery unnamed
Like
roles.
pathways of youth pathways or whatever you might want to call it. Yeah.
Exactly. So you've got this issue around Darren and what's he going to do? What roles is he going to be on the staff? Is he going to be away with the academy? Is he going to be signed in between? And then you've got the coaching staff. I mean, do INEOS say, well, we were keeping you as manager, Eric, so would you like Benny McCarthy still to be on your staff? And if so, here's a new contract for him. Or do they say, well, you're lucky to be in this job at all. We were really close to sacking you. We want to make changes. One of the compromises is that we're going to bring a coach in who we know and we trust. Again, I mean, I said right at the start that this situation is already quite messy. And this is another example of it. Recruitment is one, the coaching staff is another. I think the Ruud van Nistelrooy would make a lot of sense in that, he's a Man United legend. I know Sir Jim Radcliffe is quite taken with these Man United legends, the guys of past teams who he's watched. There is obviously that Dutch link with Ten Hag. Is that some kind of compromise? Possibly, but I think from what we've been told by Man United is that they want to get Ten Hag's contract sorted. Everything else after the contract will kind of follow in behind that.
Right.
They need to sort that contract out as quickly as possible, really, before all this other stuff can get sorted.
Yeah, exactly. So it's essentially going to be likely tied to that because they're going to want some agreement. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, I mean, certainly that's the message that we've had from Man United in the last sort of 24 hours.
Yeah, makes sense. And it is challenging because it's one of those odd situations where it's not like Ten Hag is wrong, right? It's who he is. This is his personality, his wants, the way he is. And when you get into high level, a lot of people, of course, have gotten successful by the things they are, the things that they want, the way they do things. And they've gotten to the highest level doing it that way. And that's why to me, it was always sort of going to be a bit challenging because you have the guys at INEOS, Wilcox, Barada coming in from City. They know how they do things, and that's how they've been successful. And Ten Hag knows how he does things, and that's how they're successful. And ideally, you get people that all joins up easily, and they're all aligned. In this case, they're really not. And both sides are looking at how much are they willing to compromise, even in the short term, in order to have this work, for next season, even if it's just that. I think that quite obviously the biggest thing that I would imagine INEOS won't compromise, it's hard to say, is on the recruitment front, because of course, you can change coaches and you can move things around and things can happen throughout the season in terms of style of play. It's a little bit more ambiguous, but you can't unspend 80 million on players and things like that. You can't unring those bells. Those are things that cost you for years and years and years to come. And you can still build a very good squad, I think. Even if you're not 100% sold on the manager, you can build a squad and you can still progress forward with an idea in mind, which they haven't done, changing managers back and forth and sticking and going with their ideals. So I imagine that'll be almost like the one point that I don't know if either side wants to compromise it on, though. So it could be certainly the sticking point in all of it.
Yeah, and that's probably, I mean, my personal opinion at the end of last season was that Ten Hag should stay, that there'd been enough over the 2 years. I know last season was terrible in parts, but there'd been enough over the 2 years to give him a chance. But it dragged on so long after the FA Cup final that it kind of reached the point where I thought that, it's gone on so long now that there really has to be a clean break. That there is no way of mending this now. You've shown your hand, essentially. INEOS have shown their hand, and they've shown how big their doubts were about Ten Hag. And now to sort of have these conversations about how they're going to move forward with this new contract, and how basically you're trying to force, in my mind, a round peg into a square hole. INEOS have got this very, very clear vision of how they want a manager to operate. They've got this manager already who they decided to keep, who doesn't quite fit the mold of the manager that they want. But for now, at least, they're going to try and, force that square peg into the round hole. Again, those situations rarely work out well. And hopefully I'm proved wrong, and they get the signings in who they want. They start the season brilliantly. All the doubts about Ten Hag disappear straight away. And, Ten Hag and INEOS and Sir Jim and Wilcox and Ashworth all get along beautifully, and it's this fantastic new era. It's just not a great start, and it's
Yeah.
very, very hard to row it back once you've got off, I think, on the wrong foot.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I agree, and I think that that's what we would all hope, is that they somehow figure it all out and come together. And you know, then a new contract being agreed and signed would obviously be a great sign of that occurring, and that's why I think for everybody it's the hope that that can happen. But certainly a lot to resolve to get there. One of the things that maybe is a miss. I think it's a bit. I think either way this ends out, it's kind of a misstep from INEOS how they've handled it in so far as, if he was going to stay, like you said, probably it should have been right away. Immediately just give him the confidence, sit down with him right after the FA Cup, before take the holiday a little later and nail it down and stay, or even before the end of the season. Would have been better.
It would have been such a simple thing to do, because I don't think that you should have. I don't think you can put that much emphasis on one game anyway. Obviously, like the FA Cup final was a fantastic day for Man United fans.
Yeah.
What performance, and a great day. But you can't judge a manager on one game, win or lose. And what should have happened if they decided they want to keep him? They should have done that, review over they came in properly, in February. They should have reviewed everything. They win the game against City. So Jim Radcliffe, we all got a statement on our phone sent about half an hour after the FA Cup final from Sir Jim, basically saying, what a great day, Man United have won the FA Cup. If there was a line at the bottom of there that said, what a great day for Erik ten Hag, what a performance, he's our guy, we're looking forward to building him with him the next season, everyone would have gone, okay, brilliant, done and dusted, you're staying, that's the end of that. And that would have been, in my mind, that would have been the way to do it, but not have this prolonged period of the best part of 3 weeks after the FA Cup final where you're quite publicly speaking to other managers, and other managers' agents are briefing about those conversations and how detailed and how far along those conversations are. I mean, it's at the very, very best, it's a bad look. It's a bad, optically, it's awful, and I don't see how a manager recovers from that, because United could lose the second or third game of next season, and immediately the fans will be going, oh, he's going to get sacked then, and the media will be full of all this stuff about, oh, he's on the back foot again. It's really, really tough for managers in any job. It's a horrible job being a manager, but particularly when you're starting on the back foot, because it's really, really hard to get it back.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think maybe some of what led to this, which is still ongoing, and maybe is just another miscalculation on INEOS' part, is of course Dan Ashworth, because I'm sure that they would have wanted him to be the one leading that whole process of the manager review, the decision, everything. And now there is no idea when he's going to join at this point, is there?
Not right now. I think, first off, it's a good appointment. He is, regarded as one of, or the best in the business, and that's how INEOS have kind of set themselves up with getting Berardi from City and Ashworth as well. So on the face of it, fair play, you've gone and got the best. I do think some of Sir Jim's comments about that have been quite naive. Things like, Newcastle are being very awkward. So we're not being awkward. They're exercising their right to not have you take one of their key employees. It's not, football is not other business. It's
competitive. It's much more competitive. It's direct, like head to head. Yeah,
it is. You can't just go. You can't just go to other clubs and say, right, we're having you. Really, you come to us, and the team who are losing, that guy they're not just going to wave him off and with a smile and say good luck. That's not how it works. So, on the one part, a great appointment, and for the future, fantastic. But I just think Sir Jim and INEOS have maybe been a little bit naive. They've Jean-Claude Blanc and Sir Jim Radcliffe have told United staff that recruitment will not be up to full speed without Dan Ashworth in place. Which again, it's not. This is not an overnight project. It's a I think Sir Jim said sort of 3 years to get them back on track, which is probably a little bit naive. But it's a long-term project. But I think that the idea that Dan Ashworth was going to be in before this window to kind of lead everything and lead this sort of triumphant first summer was really never ever going to happen. And you speak to a lot of agents who obviously got vested interest in having their players linked with Man United, but the message from an awful lot of agents is that Man United are behind on their summer business compared to other clubs, and I certainly do get that feeling that United are kind of playing catch up a little bit, and I think some of that is down to the naivety of INEOS, thinking that they could just get Dan Ashworth in straight away to kind of spearhead this recruitment drive, and now they're kind of they're fighting against a little bit of indecision. They're fighting against communication problems with you've got your sporting director who you can't really speak to because he's on gardening leave. You've got Jason Wilcox, whose job isn't really to lead recruitment. He's a technical director. Lots of it is going to be down to people like Steve Brown and Matt Hargreaves, who that's not really their job. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be really, really tough. And I know United fans hate it when people start talking about the summers and saying, "Oh, it could be a difficult one." It could be a really, really difficult one to navigate. Obviously, they're going to have to do something in the market and bring at least a couple of players in. Hopefully they're in a position to do that, and they get the right people in. I think really the biggest thing for INEOS this summer is to just don't make any mistakes. Don't make an Anthony-sized mistake that's going to cost you down the line. And actually, the message again from United about the transfer window has been that they are going to be relatively cautious. That if there's going to be a little bit of doubt about a player or a position, they're going to err on the side of caution, because long term, while that's not going to thrill Man United fans, because they love to see the players with the scarves over their heads at the stadium, I think really that's going to serve Man United well moving forward. That caution probably this summer is the best way forward.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. And it's not the most positive aspect of it, but to give a little bit of the other side of it, of course, it's a lot of years of things not going right. A lot of years of overspending, and we're still paying for, obviously, the players, the overspending. Casemiro's still on the books, which they've highlighted as an example. Anthony, they're still paying for all these transfers, and they're still heavily affecting the budgets today. And I can kind of get the idea, though I think that they would never want this to be said. I wouldn't call it kicking the can down the road, but maybe delaying a little bit on some of the going all in. Same thing with the manager process, as you would see in the market with Dan Ashworth not being there, but saying we can't do all the big things this year yet. We're just not ready. Maybe we're pushing it off to where next summer we will be in a much better position financially. We'll be in a much better position with the staff. We'll have a lot more time to make assessments. We'll have run things differently, and we can really attack it and take a huge step forward at that period of time. In the meantime, there's other things they are working on that should make a difference, right? From an INEOS perspective, because things that they are maybe more proficient in, right? And one of those is the training ground, as well as and in part of that, dealing with the injuries. What do you make of those plans, and what's your understanding of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably right in that. The one thing that INEOS, and particularly to Jim, I think they feel that pressure from fans to deliver, and they understand the need for recycling the squad and how a new signing can kind of really lift a fan base. But I also think that their background is in business and controlling the things that you can control, and the training ground, the medical department, the stadium are all three things that you can do that need to be addressed that probably aren't particularly glamorous. There was a press release made a couple of weeks ago about 50 million for the training ground, and no one really blinked an eye. If it was a press release about £50 million signing, everyone would have gone, "Oh, fantastic! We're getting back to where we need to be." But it is really important that they address the training ground. I mean, again, John Murtaugh in particular had driven this kind of these plans to rejuvenate the training ground, because it is getting old. And when you sort of walk around cities in particular, you can see the differences between cities and Man United. And Carrington, and particularly Old Trafford, obviously is looking very, very tired. I mean, the medical staff, the medical department is something that has caused INEOS quite a lot of consternation last season with people like Sir Dave Brailsford. I mean, that is his kind of area of expertise. That how do you get elite athletes performing at an elite level every single day? That is his speciality. He's made it very clear to people at Man United that he doesn't know who the next right back should be and who the centre forward should be. So I don't even think he really cares, but his level of expertise is about elite performance. And the medical department is something that obviously needs looked at given the injury record. Again, my concern with that is a little bit that you cannot just blame the medical staff for a season where you've had an injury record like that. I think at some point the manager and the staff need to look at themselves as well and kind of understand that they played a part in that. It's not good enough just to say, oh, well, the medical staff aren't good enough or the medical facilities aren't good enough. So I think there's going to have to be a kind of, it's a double-edged sword a little bit, isn't it? That there's going to have to be kind of improvements made on both sides of that. But the one thing I would say is that, well, fans love transfers and new players coming in. Ten Hag and United showed last season when they had a fully fit squad, they were, a match for most of the teams in the league. So, while it's not as glamorous as signing a new £50 million player, if you can get to a point where Luke Shaw plays 50 games, or Casemiro's not missing a game, or Rashford's fully fit for the whole season, then that is a massive improvement on where you were last season. So I think that's right, and I think that is one of the good things that maybe INEOS have brought in that perhaps most fans don't see, this kind of attention to detail, that level, and understanding that it's not just about buying new players all the time. It is about kind of creating this environment, this elite performance environment for the entire club to function at the level it should be at, because it just hasn't been. So if this summer ends with United having addressed the situation with the medical staff or the medical department, or improving Carrington, but haven't really signed anyone that's fantastically is going to improve the first team by a massive measure, then that is still a step forward. So I think that's one of the positive things that INEOS have brought, that kind of attention to detail, because under the Glazers in particular, that there just hasn't been that attention to kind of the environment, I suppose. And it's a word obviously that Dave Brailsford has used a lot and Sir Jim has used a lot. And environment it counts for something. And if they can address that this summer, then that is a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with that. And when you talk about the injury fronts, there's obviously so many things that can contribute to that, from diet to, the way you warm up, to the way you cool down, to the way, just to all of the aspects that go into it. Rehab can be about the facilities, can be about the people, can be about so many things, with players taking too long to return or having lots of setbacks. And it is correct. This is very much, it's almost irrelevant that they're footballers in this case when you're talking about athletes being healthy and being able to perform and being able to run and work at the level that is needed. That is something that INEOS Sport know and have enormous amounts of experience with, and can affect positively. And it's true. I think everybody would consider that no matter how last season went, what you think of the manager, good or bad, there's no way the team isn't better if everybody's healthy, or at least 50% more healthy than it was last time. Anything would be better than what was there. If you have a left back for the season, that is better than what happened. So I think that's definitely a big point. And then obviously another factor in that, which ties into the first part of the discussion, is the manager and why they probably want some of these things. They want to have in the ability to influence things like the training schedules, right? Because things like training schedules even are typically things managers want to run and control. But there's a lot of data and sports science and medical science that goes into proper scheduling, even of training and intensity and all of that. And it's not even to put the blame on it. Any manager is going to want as much time as possible on the training ground with his players, right? Working on them. But I think that INEOS are the type of people who are going to want to maybe influence that a little and say, well, this is the best way to set it up where we're not going to have injuries, where we're not going to have overwork and all of those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a pretty key point in that, obviously it's a manager's prerogative to coach the players in the way that he wants, but often some of that has got to be data led, and at other clubs you've got situations where maybe a manager says, right, I want them to do this drill, and that's passed then to the data guys and the fitness guys who go, well, okay, they can do this drill, but they can do this drill for 6 minutes and they can do it 3 times, or maybe they've had a week between games, and maybe today they can do it 8 times and they can do it for 12 minutes. I don't know, whatever. These are really important factors, and also things like not individual training programs, but understanding the differences between players' bodies. In that, Casemiro cannot train in the same way as Kobe Mainoo, or Marcus Rashford can't train in the same way as Garnacho, and understanding that it's not a detriment to the team spirit or the morale of the group if you treat players differently. One of Ten Hag's big things is obviously discipline, and he treats everyone in the same way. You've got to be part of the group, and that's that there is a lot to be said for that. But elite football it doesn't quite work like that, and then you can't expect Casemiro with 700 games under his belt over a 12-year career to be able to train in the same way as a 18-year-old kid who's just starting out and not pick up injuries. So all these little kind of things that maybe would help the players stay fit, and the INEOS are going to want to get a grip of, because ultimately, this you're right, this is their area of expertise: sports science, data-led improvements in creating an elite sporting environment. And that's perhaps where they can make the biggest, aside from these sort of headline appointments like Ashworth and Wilcox, this is where INEOS maybe can make the biggest improvements, because it's a massive part of elite level football now. And if Sir Jay Brailsford can bring in some of that expertise and that knowledge that he's kind of used to obviously fantastic with success at British cycling, then it's a great step forward. And like you said, if it means that Luke Shaw plays 50 games and you don't have to play a season with no left back, then obviously that's a positive as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for myself personally, during the entire chaotic takeover process, it was one of for me, the big positives of INEOS is that knowing how far United have been behind in some of these areas, that they could kind of start higher up than just a businessman with no experience in this aspect of sport coming in, that they actually have people who know these things. They have a whole business. I mean, huge branch of the thing is with sport and knowing all of this. So hopefully that can be put to good effect, and that we see positives over the course of the season, separate to signings.
And that was one of the big things when they were having these meetings during the takeover process, particularly with the Qataris, obviously, who became sort of in this head-to-head battle to take United over. That the people who were in those meetings said that it was very, very clear, very, very quickly, that the questions INEOS were asking kind of proved that they knew what they were talking about, whereas the questions that were being asked by the Qataris were very, very basic level stuff. And that was one of the things that came out of those early meetings with all the different groups. INEOS and the people that INEOS had in that room knew the questions to ask. They knew exactly what they were looking for. They knew exactly where the improvements would be. And it's probably a good thing that it is INEOS. I mean, I know lots of fans would probably have quite liked the Qataris to swoop in with billions and billions of pounds and ripped everything up. But in terms of knowledge about how you create sporting excellence, INEOS have that. It's now just about transferring that to Man United and dealing with all the different challenges, the specific challenges of being in charge of Man United, and making that plan work for them.
Yep, for sure, absolutely, and hopefully that is one of the things that we do see either way. as you mentioned, with kind of transfers and being cautious this summer as well, one of the other issues that United have that is just certainly an issue is, of course, the profit and sustainability rules, especially up through about 6 days from now, where this year, because they had 2 years ago, I think it was the worst loss of any club in the Premier League financially, something like that. That they lost 100 and something million, and you have this kind of cap that they're on. In working towards, where really obviously the finances of all this get so complicated, but I think the summary that most people understand is that they could spend very little this year. And when you see cost cutting on things like down to staff and down to travel to the FA Cup and all of these things, you kind of get the idea. They're saying we really need to, this financial year, because they can't do anything about players, right? During this year, they couldn't cancel contracts, they couldn't sell people during the season. Somehow we've got to curtail these finances to get us back under control. Otherwise, we'll never be able to spend moving forward. And maybe it frees up a little bit after July 1st. But certainly, I think that is a factor. Is that also your understanding of things?
Yeah, I mean, the message that we've had from United is that the finances are tight. The PSR regulations, I think everyone at the club kind of got a little bit of a wake-up call last year or last season with the points deductions. The Everton one in particular. I mean, I don't want to be too dramatic, but scared a lot of people at Man United that, really these rules were going to get enforced quite heavily and it could lead to points deductions. And when you're talking about deductions and is that the difference possibly between you qualifying for the Champions League or not?
Yeah.
Then you really, really have to take them seriously. And it was really telling, I think, before. I think it was in the December fans forum where there was a message read out. I think it was read out by Colette Roach, but it was dictated by John Murtaugh, who basically his message was, we understand now that PSR rules have teeth, was a quote that he used, and that's why they were never going to spend in January.
Yep.
And I think that has kind of carried on to this summer. That I mentioned before that there was going to be this sort of level of caution about the transfer window, and I think that's an accurate evaluation of where they're at. That they're not going to risk anything. They're not going to risk tipping over that PSR limit. For a particular player, they're going to play things very, very safe until they get these finances under control. And it is moving in the right direction, because over the last couple of years, you've got Paul Pogba, David De Gea, Cristiano Ronaldo, Varane now, Martial have all got off the wage bill.
Yep.
It'll make a big difference this summer if they can get a permanent transfer for Mason Greenwood.
Yes.
Obviously, Jadon Sancho is another important one. There's other couple that they would like to get realistic offers for. I think if they can get the squad and the finances under control this summer, and maybe bring in one or two as well, then they would deem that a successful summer. But they just aren't going. There just isn't the room to spend massive amount of money, and it was really telling that the message that they sent to Everton about Branthwaite was that you can quote 70 million all you like, but we haven't got 70 million to spend on one player. So don't keep saying 70 million, because we haven't got it. Like, they just haven't. In the past, United have spent 70 million on a whim almost.
Yep.
They're just not going to do that this summer because they haven't got it, and they are trying to make changes to the squad and make tweaks here and there, but they're looking more in that kind of 30-40 million pound bracket. It's driving the interest in Joshua Zirkzee. It's the interest in Jonathan David. Yep. The offer from Branthwaite was in that bracket. Yep. All these players that they're looking at are all in that 30-40 million pound bracket, and that's for a reason, because they just can't afford to overspend. Ultimately, and I don't really like to single out Anthony because it's not his fault what they paid for him, but they're going to be paying for that transfer for years, and they just don't want to get in a situation like that again, because they just cannot afford it, because it just sets you back, and then they haven't got time to waste really when it comes to catching the likes of City.
For sure, and it makes a lot of sense, and yeah, I mean they don't want to take any steps backwards. Certainly, as a new owner's coming in their first summer, they don't want to do things that set them back in the future. The challenge, of course, Varane is gone, right? And you had a really tricky situation at center back last year. Harry Maguire almost left, and you can imagine if that had happened, that it would have been really ugly in the last season. Johnny Evans played a lot more games than he expected to play, which was probably 0 was his expectation. So they have to get a center back, and that's obviously part of the challenge here. You have Gerard Branthwaite, somebody that they certainly had identified for quite a long time as the player they wanted to go for. Right age profile, Premier League experience, all the boxes that they want to tick, where you have a better chance of success. I think they're in their mind of getting a player like that where there's a lower risk. I think there was obviously a hope that Everton's own PSR situation would contribute to making the deal a little bit easier, but they've seemed to resolve that with one of these nice academy sales that everybody seems to be doing at the moment. I know that, as I understand it, they've continued to have some dialogue. They've looked at, ways to potentially shift other players like Lindelof, to add to a little bit of it. But they also have a problem, which was that Todibo was, I think, the really well-priced backup option to this whole thing. I think he was going to be somewhere in the range of 35 million to 40 million, really wanted to move. And then sort of after winning the FA Cup, I guess, everything changed with that, and he's no longer an option due to UEFA rules, and puts him in a tough position now, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. The Branthwaite one I can understand because of all the things you just mentioned there, that, he's a young English player, obviously very, very good. There's a premium placed on left-footed centre-halves because there aren't that many around.
Yeah.
The only slight concern I would have with that is if you're going to get Jared Branthwaite, you've already got a left-sided centre-half who's not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. So what do you do? I think from United's point of view, the possibility that they could get Branthwaite was perhaps too good an opportunity to miss, and so that's why they went so hard. So I can understand that. Obviously, they're trying to replace Varane, who was a right-sided centre-half, so it would perhaps make more sense balance-wise to look for a right-sided centre-half. And obviously, they have got other options. Whether any of those actually come off or not is another matter. Lindelof is a big one. Obviously, there is interest in from Fenerbahce, where Jose is now. As I understand it, as of yesterday, there hadn't been any club-to-club contact between United and Fenerbahce, but United would welcome that. The problem that we keep hearing is that lots of these players who there is interest in, that United's valuation is considered to be unrealistic. Certainly the case with Aaron Wan-Bissaka, that Galatasaray looked at him, they're desperate for a right back. Galatasaray looked at him, were told that it would probably take more than 20 million, and they said, we just can't afford that. That's nowhere, that's completely out of our budget. They love Scott McTominay as well at Galatasaray. Again, we're told this is what it would take, and they said we can get nowhere near that. So that's completely dead. That really can't carry on this summer. That United are going to have to raise funds from somewhere. It's going to have to be Greenwood, Sancho, probably Lindelof, maybe a Wan-Bissaka type. Maybe you accept an offer for Scott McTominay because as an academy graduate he would move the dial on PSR so massively. But again, you're right that you mentioned there about academy sales. United just don't do that well.
It's not their model. They haven't been doing that for a long time.
They don't sell well. They don't sell academy graduates well. You had a situation last year where City sold James Trafford to Burnley for 20 odd million, who'd never made a first team appearance, and Zidane Iqbal went to Utrecht from United, having made a first team appearance and been on the bench a number of times, and United got about 850 euros. That is the difference between being able to spend this summer and not being able to spend this summer. That they need to start selling better, and part of that is better negotiation. Part of that is not offering huge wages, because again, with wages again are an issue. Lindelof is probably on wages, or it is on wages at Man United that he's not going to find elsewhere.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
The intermediary who was working with Galatasaray about Scott McTominay and Wan-Bissaka was talking about, possibly for Scott McTominay, maybe a Bournemouth or a Wolves is a better fit because they have money to spend. Well, Bournemouth and Wolves haven't got the wage budget to match what Scott McTominay is on at Man United anyway, so it doesn't matter. All these things have to fall into place for Man United to be a better run football club. It's not going to happen overnight. And I can understand why it's massively frustrating for Man United fans. But hopefully they can get Sancho and Greenwood. Those are the two main ones. If they can sort those out and raise a bit of capital through them, get relatively big wages off the books, that would be a really good start this summer. Again, it's not particularly glamorous having a summer where you sell players rather than buy players. But that is the key. That is the key for everything for Man United at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. Agreed. And it's definitely interesting. They did manage to let go of Fred to Fenerbahce last year but I imagine that they'd be looking at a similar deal, for Lindelof. I think it was in the end something like only 10 million for the player and with a year left. And there's all sorts of little things in there that eat up some of the profitability when you're selling in the final years of contract and all that as well. But it seems like if they could get Greenwood, Sancho gone, maybe Lindelof as well, might make it easier to find some kind of agreement with Everton if they continue to push on Branthwaite. But certainly there's backups. I think part of the problem is, of course, in the market, there's not that many that are more affordable. You did a thing on Lenny Yoro as well, but obviously I think it looks more and more likely every day he's going to wait for Madrid.
Yeah, I think United were told that relatively early. That again, I think United are looking at him as kind of that he's so highly rated that they have to be involved in the race for him if he's going to move. Unfortunately for Man United, many times over the last couple of years they've lost out to Real Madrid with the likes of Camavinga, Tchouaméni, players like that who have just picked Real Madrid because it's Real Madrid, and the expectation is that he will go to Real Madrid if he moves. But United are there if there's a change of heart. Mark Gahey at Palace is one that they've looked at a lot. I think the expectation is that if he moves, he'll end up at somewhere like Liverpool. Obviously, though, with every positive performance he puts in for England,
more expensive as well, isn't he?
His price is going up. There's also that English tax.
Mm-hmm.
Just to understand where United's financial position is, Elise is going to go to Bayern Munich, and United are absolutely nowhere near that deal. He is obviously a very, very good player, someone who could improve Man United's team instantly. United were nowhere near that, and for good reason, because they just can't afford him. You're talking about outgoings there as well. I mean, there's a big one in Casemiro, but Casemiro goes to Saudi. Casemiro is probably the one player who would probably need replaced because they haven't got another genuine number six. Wan-Bissaka, McTominay, Lindelof, Sancho, Greenwood, they could all go and you wouldn't necessarily need to bring in replacements. Casemiro, I don't think that's true. So on the one hand, you get huge wages off your books, but you need to replace him with someone else.
Yes.
What number six are you going to get to play 60 games in the Premier League and the Europa League and not have him cost the best part of 70 million, 80 million pounds? It's almost impossible. It just shows you the depths of the United's problems this summer, and how hard it's going to be for them to do what they want.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And like you had mentioned earlier, I think that's why, looking at Joshua Zirkzee as a forward makes a lot of sense because of the release clause, right? He's in a reasonable price bracket where you don't have to worry about it's 35, for the player anyway, it's 35 million, it's 35 million pounds, and that's what it's going to be. And would give you a lot of flexibility. But, the other aspect to this, when you mention, like when you're talking about selling and the big wages and how these cause problems later on, so many times, of course, they give new contracts out after 2 years to a player when they join United on another bump of wages just because they've performed a little bit. And you kind of have a situation presently almost with both Bruno and Rashford, not to make it all so negative, right? But that, Rashford got a really big bump in wages, right?
Yeah.
And then had a rough season, and there's a lot of reasons for that could go around with himself, but also with the way that his role changed in the team and so many things there. And does he need to consider his future? Bruno Fernandes, obviously, it wasn't totally convincing, everything that's happened, and then his agent kind of shopping him around to Saudi, to Bayern, to Barcelona, to all these places, and probably playing for a new contract also. In there. What do you think of both of those situations? I mean, ultimately, I think it's more likely they'll stay, but it's not quite 100% settled, is it?
No, I mean, I think they would have listened to offers for Rashford
Yeah.
if a sensible one came along. They said very, very quickly, before the end of last season, that they didn't think there was a market for Marcus at all. In that, Marcus is probably more to Man United than just a football player. Having come through the academy, here's this face of Man United. So what does he mean? What is his value to Man United, and what would you need to receive to make it worth your while? Well, the fee that you would need to receive, no one's got, because he's not going to Real Madrid. There. It's not because the two teams, the teams who could afford him are Man City. I mean, he's not going there unless he wants to all hell to break loose. He's not going to Real Madrid because they've got some of the best attacking players in the world. The one team maybe who have got decent relations with his representatives, PSG, said again very, very early on after the Mbappe news that Marcus Rashford was really, really low down their list. So when you remove PSG, there is just nowhere that he's going to go. So you have to hope now that he's got this huge contract, he's not going anywhere, that he kind of starts to repay that, and that those wages look sensible because of what he's delivering for the team. The Bruno thing is slightly different in that I think probably he is one of the players who has delivered, but he has been very conscious of his ambition, and he said it before he signed his last contract that he wanted assurances from the board that this was the place to win trophies. I think probably we're in that same boat again, that he wants to know that this new era is going to be the place for him to be, and he's going to get to play in the Champions League and challenge for the Premier League title. Obviously, that would come with a new contract to get, but the message from Man United is that that's just not a priority, that his contract is secure, he's under contract. They've got no issues that way. If Bayern Munich or Inter Milan or Al Nassr want to come in with a massive offer, maybe they would look at it, but they're not in a desperate hurry to sell him, because he is one of the players who they believe that they can rely on. But again, it's a problem. You mentioned there about someone like Joshua Zirkzee coming in. Well, he's coming in as a centre forward, and he's got an agent in Keir Jarabshin who's going to say, okay, well, what's your wage structure? Well, my guy is a forward. You've got a forward here who's on £350,000 a week. I think that my guy probably is worth £200,000 a week. And then what do? Do you give him £200,000 a week to bring him through the door, or do you say, well, no, this is a new start for us. We're offering you £80,000 a week, because AC Milan can probably offer him £80,000 a week. And he's probably going to play more games at AC Milan than he's at Man United. So then it becomes a bit more of a battle. The recruitment, Man United's recruitment is so complicated. I don't envy those recruitment guys at all, because to start changing 10 years of mismanagement is a massive job, and it just doesn't happen overnight. Hopefully they can make a couple of steps in the right direction this summer and get them sort of moving to a point that is sustainable, because right now it's going to be tough.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's quite a knot that they have to kind of undo here. That's going to take a lot of time. And I think that ultimately, if they want to make signings, just from my perspective of it, they're probably more likely to pay a little over the odds for players they really want than to buy a mess of players they don't want. But I think there's a limitation to that. I think they'd rather get one or two good players in that they're really sold on after making some sales, if it costs a little more, than say, all right, we're going to turn and buy 5 players that we don't like, particularly that are way down our list that maybe won't fit in the future. But I think some of that is, we don't really know, because they've never run a market a window for United before.
I actually think there's a case to not sign anyone this
Sure.
summer.
Yeah.
And it's a conversation that me and a couple of the other reporters had with John Merton not that many months ago, and said, I think that if United were very, very honest with the fans and said, look, our financial position is really quite dire at the moment. We haven't got the money to bring in the players that we want, but we're really keen not to make mistakes. So what we're going to do, we're going to try and sell a lot of these fringe players, and we're going to cancel a contract or two to get someone off the books and pay them off. And you explain to Man United fans that we're doing that because in a year or 2 years' time, that puts us in a really fantastic position to really start moulding the squad in the way that we want. The problem is that we're going to run with a really small squad this year, and it probably means that we're going to have to play a lot of youth team players in, say, the Carabao Cup. And the chances are that we're going to play a Carabao Cup tie against a Championship side and we're going to lose, and we're going to get knocked out. But you explain to Man United fans that is what you're doing and that's the plan moving forward. I think there's something to say for that. John Murtagh said that he didn't think that United fans would ever go for that. But I think there's a case to be made to do that.
I think you're right. I mean, I think there is some merit, and it's like we all want. I guess when we really look at it, of course, it is a long-term thing. These guys coming in and fixing this, and these mistakes have occurred over a long period of time, and to some degree, they'll never say it, but everybody has to be willing to put up with some time of success, not necessarily looking the same as what they would hope it would be. The short-term pain, long-term gain. And I think it would be helpful for them to be maybe a bit more forthright about that, if that's the direction that they go, or that's the direction it's looking like it's going to go, to come out and speak, right? Because I think that's the biggest thing, is if you fronted up to it, made it very clear, especially once maybe Omar Barada's in there officially, right, in a few weeks. If he came forward and said, look, this is the reality of it, and did an interview or statements and said, this is just where we are, this is the truth of it, and we're doing everything we can to fix it, but it takes time. This is years and years of all of this, and obviously the complication of that is that the people who made those mistakes are still 75% or 73% owners of the club, and don't want too much to be said about them. But you could pin it essentially on people who've departed and who are more involved in running the club, I suppose. But that is a complication. So from your perspective, just as kind of a final question on this, obviously they're still active on Branthwaite, still active on Zirkzee. They're still working on these sales. The lack of noise on so many other names, or the lack of lots of reports on so many other names, I think sometimes people have had a bit of a, maybe it's just over optimism that there's a lot of secret deals going on in private. But the more likely outcome here is simply that they are a bit behind. The finances are very tight. And these are the things that they're working on. Not that they don't have alternates, and not that they haven't made some contacts, but there's likely not some big surprise, advanced under the hood, ready to pop out that nobody knows about.
No, I mean, and we've spoken about all those complications with United's recruitment. Obviously, it's another added complication is the fact there's a major tournament or two major tournaments going on, and that these camps tend not to like any kind of interference. So it is always quiet. You usually during these major tournaments, and things get to sort of start to pick up when pre-season really starts. As far as I know, there's not some big surprise that they're going to pull out of a hat. I mean, hopefully I'm wrong, and that it's something to kind of lift the mood around Man United, because obviously there's nothing that lifts the mood like a transfer and a new player, and I think they are going to sort of need to do something to kind of get the fans back on board a little bit.
I think so.
Because the longer it goes on, the more disillusioned they become, the more messy that the situation looks, and people want to be optimistic for the new season. So. Hopefully, I think the Branthwaite one would be a really good one to get through. If they can negotiate a fair price with Everton, a really good young English player to show the kind of direction you want to go in with your recruitment drive, would be a good one to get over the line. Obviously, again, complicated because of Everton's valuation and stuff, but hopefully we can do this again at the end of the window and sort of reflect on a really positive window, and talk about some optimism heading into the new season. there is a lot of time to go. It's not deadline day.
Yeah.
We're not a week away from the deadline. There's plenty of time in the window to get these deals done. So hopefully United can start moving in the right direction. And when they kick off the season, the fans are optimistic again.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Well, I'll leave it there and appreciate it. It's nearing on almost 10 o'clock where you are covering the Euros now. So thank you for giving me all this time again. And it was great. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you very much. And we'll see you in the next video.